Hello friends and welcome to Butterfly Meadows Homestead. I'm Dorinda. Today we are going to be making a fermented food. We are going to be making fermented sauerkraut. And it's very simple to make. You don't need a lot of ingredients. You don't need a lot of equipment. And it's super easy. Even beginner fermenters can make this with no problem. So I'm going to show you how step by step, and I'm going to give you some tips along the way. Let's get started and I'll show you how to make this delicious probiotic fermented cabbage called sauerkraut. So first let's go over the ingredients you need. The only ingredients you need will be cabbage and salt. I use Himalayan salt in my kitchen. That is what I use most all of the time. I very rarely use any other kind of salt. You can use sea salt or any other kind of salt that you want to use. Just make sure that it's pure salt and not table salt, because table salt has an anti-caking agent in it, and it could have other things in it which might interfere with the fermenting process. So just make sure you have some pure salt of some kind. And of course you're going to need some cabbage. Organic cabbage is wonderful if you can get it or you raise your own, but if you can't and you're just buying it in the grocery store, that is not a problem. I have never heard any studies done on this or whatever, but personally I feel like the fermentation process takes out impurities anyway. So don't worry about trying to find organic cabbage if you can't. And you're going to be peeling the outer leaves off anyway, and that also helps get rid of a lot of chemicals. This is not organic cabbage. Someone gave me this head of cabbage, and you notice it's not very green, and that's because I have already peeled the outer leaves off, and last night I even used some of the larger leaves on the outside to make cabbage rolls. So it was a green cabbage, but now it looks pretty pale, but that's okay. It'll still make wonderful sauerkraut. You'll need a head of cabbage and you'll need your salt. Now you're going to need some kind of a large bowl. I have this large stainless steel bowl. If you don't have a large stainless steel bowl, you can use a large glass bowl. You can even use a large plastic bowl. Whatever kind of bowl that you have, you can use it to chop up and to begin your brine. But when you put your ferment in the jar, when you put your cabbage in the jar to ferment, you're going to want to use glass or a fermenting crock. I would love to have a fermenting crock. I don't have a small one. I have a large 8-gallon crock, but I don't want to make that much kraut right now. So I'm going to be doing it. Actually, I have a 2-quart jar, which is a half a gallon, and I have a 1-quart jar that I'm going to be using to make this kraut. If you don't have mason jars, canning jars, but you have old pickle jars, no matter what size they are, you can use those. You just need a glass jar with a lid. That's all you need. So whatever kind of jar you have, you can use it. But I'm going to be, and the reason I have a half-gallon jar and a quart jar is because I weighed my cabbage. And if you can't, you can probably weigh yours in the grocery store as you're buying it, and that'll give you an idea of how much cabbage you have. But this weighs 6 pounds. And I know that 2 pounds will fit into a quart jar. So I can fit 2 pounds in this jar and 4 pounds in this jar. So this should be enough to hold all of my cabbage. If it's not enough, I can just eat what is left or put it in a smaller jar. But nevertheless, there won't be any waste. And the jar needs to be full, but it's not like has to be tip-top full. So it's okay if it doesn't quite fill the jar. You just don't want a lot of space in your jar. So that's what you're going to need. And you also will want something to weight the top of your ferment with. Now I have these Mason pickle pucks. It's just a little glass disc, and it fits down inside of the top of the jar. And you can order these. I will leave links below where if you want to order a Mason jar pickling set where you get the pickle pipe lids and these pucks, and it also comes with this pounder. I will leave the link below where you can order that. But I ordered these because I ferment a lot of things and I like them. But you can use whatever you use to weight the top of your jar. Just make sure that it is food grade and that nothing is going to leach out of it that would be bad for you. Like, I wouldn't recommend using wood. I don't know, wood might be safer than a lot of plastic things, but just use something that preferably is glass. If you can find a small, they make little small glass jelly jars like this. You may have some of those around. But whatever you use, just make sure it's safe and not something that any kind of poisons are going to leach out of during the fermentation process. And of course, you're going to need something to chop your cabbage with. A really good sharp knife, or this cleaver that I have here, whatever you have that you can cut your cabbage up with. And you don't necessarily have to have this pounder. You can use your hands, just your hands, or you can use something like this because you're going to have to pound the cabbage a little bit to bruise it up. I just wanted to show you as an example. So I went down to my pantry in the basement this morning. I knew I had some ferments down there. And I like to make giardiniera. And this is a jar of giardiniera that I made in June of 22. I'm not telling you how long you can keep your fermented cabbage, but I am going to show you that I've had this since June the 22nd. I've already eaten some out of it. It's delicious. So once your ferment is fermented properly and there's no mold and it's a good clean ferment, you can seal that jar up and keep it for a long time in the refrigerator. And this wasn't in the refrigerator, but it was in my basement root cellar like area that is very cool. It does not get hot. It does not get above 60 degrees down there. It's usually really cool. And I was just so excited when I found this. One, I was out of ferments in the fridge and I really wanted some. And so I went and I found this. I'm trying to find a piece of cauliflower because that's my favorite. That's an onion. Let's see. Oh, and it just smells so good. Okay, this is kind of large, but I'll cut it in half. So this is a piece of cauliflower out of the giardiniera. And hopefully you can tell it's still very firm. It tastes wonderful. Excuse me for a moment while I have this wonderful treat. Now, I made this giardiniera almost identical to the way I'm going to make this sauerkraut. The only difference was in the giardiniera, because these pieces of vegetables are in large chunks, I used a salt brine, whereas in the sauerkraut, we are going to do what is called dry salting. And the difference is the brine, you use water and salt. 1 teaspoon of salt per cup of water will make a brine that you can use to ferment. You can also make sauerkraut that way if you want to make a salt brine. That's 1 teaspoon of salt per 1 cup of water, and however many cups you need. If you were making, well, let's say you were making a half-gallon jar of fermented vegetables, you would probably need about 4 cups of water and 4 cups of vegetables, or somewhere along that line. What I usually do is I fill my jar with the vegetables just as full as I can get it, and I make up enough brine, and I pour the brine over the top until it covers the top of the vegetables. So, but pretty much half and half, or close to it, maybe a little more vegetable in volume than brine. But when you're using whole vegetables like pickles, whole cucumbers, or any large chunks of vegetables, you're going to want to use a salt brine. But if you're chopping up the vegetables like we're going to do with this cabbage, then you can use what is called dry salting. Now, I could also use a salt brine to make my sauerkraut. It would not be a problem. And I may do that one day just because I love the juice. But right now I have enough juice. The juice from this ferment is delicious, and I'll be using that, so I don't need the extra juice on this cabbage, but you can do that. I just wanted to explain the difference. And for dry salting, of course, I told you how much salt, how much water you need in a brine. For dry salting, you need 1 tablespoon of salt per 2 pounds of cabbage. So I have 6 pounds of cabbage, therefore I have 3 tablespoons of salt ready to go into my dry salting. You don't want to use too much salt because that's going to make your vegetable softer when it ferments. And you don't want to skimp on the salt because then you're going to increase the possibility of mold or bad bacteria growing. So you want at least 1 tablespoon of salt per 2 pounds of cabbage. Now you can go 2.5 tablespoons of salt if you want more salt, or maybe you live in an area where mold is more prone to grow, or you're having trouble with mold, you can increase the salt. Now, after the fermentation process is complete, you don't have a salty brine. Like the juice in this ferment is not a salty brine. It's a delicious, wonderful, pickled, fermented brine that just tastes delicious. It's not like salty. The fermentation process just changes everything. And fermentating vegetables is a wonderful thing to do. One, it is a way to preserve fresh vegetables without losing the nutrients. Now, this jar being particularly as old as it is, I don't know if the nutritional value is as good as it was a year or so ago when I put it away, but I am positive that it still has a lot of nutrition and a lot of the probiotic value to it. Now, after it finished fermenting, I did use my vacuum sealer that seals. I have an attachment that I can put on here and suck all of the air out of it. I did seal it that way. You do not want to can your fermented foods the traditional water bath canning way, because that will kill all of the probiotics. And there's no need to ferment it. If you're going to kill the probiotics, you might as well use a vinegar pickle method and skip the fermentation process altogether. But I did seal it because air, oxygen, is the enemy to your fermented foods. So if this had not been sealed and there had been air left in it, it might not have lasted like it did. But because I took all of the air out, no oxygen could get to the vegetables. Therefore, the process of fermentation stopped. So I just wanted to share that with you. If you've never had home fermented foods before, I encourage you to start. And starting with sauerkraut is the best place to start because it is one of the easiest to do. But any vegetable, any fruit, you can ferment it. And once you start fermenting them and eating them, your body just tells you, I love that, I want that. You know, you will be, if you've ever had cravings for chocolate or things like that, the craving for fermented foods is a lot like that. Your body just craves them because it is good for them. Now, you do want to eat them in moderation. You wouldn't want to sit down and eat this entire jar because it is filled with probiotics, and it probably would upset your gut if you ate too much at one time. Too much of anything is not good anyway, but it does introduce healthy probiotics into our gut. It gives us a healthy gut, a happy gut, and it's just a wonderful thing. It boosts your immune system. A healthy, happy gut will boost your immune system, and it's wonderful during the wintertime to just take a shot of this juice every day. And we do that here at my house. If anyone is feeling like they're getting a cold, or maybe they feel a little nauseous, so they're just not feeling great, they'll come and they'll get a shot of the juice from the fermented vegetables. Sometimes I end up with a jar of vegetables that doesn't have much juice on it because everyone's been drinking the juice. And when I do that, then I just use the vegetables in a stir fry or something. But I like to eat the vegetables. I like to drink the juice, And I'm going to do some videos in the future on making giardiniera and some other fermented foods that I love. But today we're going to focus on sauerkraut. So let me move this extra stuff out of the way and I'll show you how to get started. So we have our cabbage head here, and the first thing we want to do is remove a couple of these outer larger leaves as carefully as we can without breaking them, because we are going to be using those to cover our our cabbage once we get it in the jar. That should be enough for what we need. And I'm just going to lay these to the side. The next thing we need to do is get this big head of cabbage here to a manageable size. So I'm going to cut it in half first. And most of the cabbages that you buy will have a core or a heart, whatever you want to call it. And you're probably going to want to take that out. So I'm just going to cut this half in half. Then I can lay this on the side and take out that core. Now, most people don't use this. They're very good to munch on, but most people don't put this into their sauerkraut. But I'm going to lay that to the side. And it's better if you lay the flat side down. That way you don't have so much rolling about. You don't have to be fancy about it. Just get the core out. Don't cut yourself. Want to make sure everything you use when you're creating a ferment is as clean as possible. For example, I ran my jars and my weights through the dishwasher. I boiled my lids, just simmered them a little on the stove, and I sanitized my bowl and my knife and my cutting board. And of course, I washed my hands so that I had super clean hands. I also sanitized my pounder. Anything you put in this jar, you want it to be sanitized because we don't want to grow any bad bacteria. We don't want to introduce anything that would compete with the good bacteria. And what happens during a ferment is once the good bacteria starts to grow, then it keeps the bad bacteria from growing. So you have your salt or your brine that is inhibiting the growth of any bad bacteria. You get out as much air out of the jar as you can and keep oxygen out of the jar, which inhibits the growth of bad bacteria. And then when the good bacteria start to grow and ferment, there's no way for the bad bacteria to grow. And that's how ferments work. Now you can chop your cabbage however you want. Most people just do this slicing method like this. When I was a kid, I remember when they used to make kraut when I was a kid, it was a big ordeal. It was a big all-day event, and all the aunts and all of us kids, of course, we had to have something to do. And so all around my grandma's table, everyone would have a bowl and some cabbage and a chopper. And we didn't have enough choppers. So what they would do is they would take cans that canned food came in, and they would set the empty can on the wood cook stove, and it would get hot, and the little ring around the can would come off. So you had a chopper, and us kids always got the homemade choppers, and we sat around the table and we chopped cabbage for a long time. It seemed like, as a child, it seemed like a really long time. And then the adults would take that cabbage and they would turn it into sauerkraut, and they usually used crocks. And there's also, they had a method they used in a jar, but it really doesn't matter how you get your cabbage chopped as long as you get it chopped. Now, as you are chopping your cabbage, if you see any bad pieces of cabbage, maybe it's black or it's dark or it just doesn't look good, go ahead and take that out. There's no use taking the risk of introducing any mold or anything into your cabbage if you don't have to. So I'm just going to slice all of this up, and I won't keep you here for the whole time, but I'm going to slice all of this cabbage up, and then I'll show you what the next step is. Okay, so I have all of my cabbage chopped and in this very large bowl. And I have my 3 tablespoons of salt to my 6 pounds of cabbage. That's 1 tablespoon of salt per pound of cabbage. And I'm just going to sprinkle some over it. And then I'm going to stir the cabbage about. I don't want to just dump it all on top. I want to make sure it gets evenly distributed. And then I'm going to sprinkle a little more salt. Okay, and then I'm going to stir it around again. Then I'm going to add more salt. Stir it around some more. And just kind of try to get what's on the bottom to the top. Now I'm going to add the rest of my salt. Oops, had a little spill. That's okay. And if you do have a little spill like that, just wait until you're finished to clean it up, because we don't want to mix our clean and our dirty tasks together. Now, so I have the salt in here. And what I'm going to do is just slightly, just slightly, I'm squeezing the cabbage. Now, if you don't want to do this with your hands, which I imagine it would be very hard to do this without getting your hands in there. You can also take your little pounder if you have one, and you want to lightly bruise the cabbage. Because what we're doing, sorry for the noise, but what we're doing is we're encouraging the water to come out of our cabbage. So you want to make sure the salt is incorporated, and just bruise that cabbage a little bit. Now what we're going to do is we're going to let this sit for about 30 minutes. And while it sits here, the salt will draw the water out of the cabbage. And then we'll be back for our next step. Meanwhile, I'm going to clean up my little mess.
So our cabbage has been sitting here in the salt brine, or salted, the dry salting has been sitting here for about 30 minutes. And I just wanted to show you how there is liquid. Hopefully you can see that, but there is liquid now in the bowl. And that liquid will continue to increase. And if you pick up a handful of the cabbage, you'll see that it's just got a lot of liquid in it if you squeeze it. So the liquid comes out easily. So now what we're going to do is we are going to put our cabbage into our jars. Now I'm going to use this funnel that's used for canning. You don't have to use one, but it just kind of helps to get the cabbage in there without it going everywhere. What we're going to do is we're going to put some cabbage in the jar, and just put 2 or 3 handfuls, and then you want to tamp it down. Now if you don't have one of these wooden tampers, you can use your fists like this. But you can You can also use the tamper, and you want it packed as tightly as possible in your jar. So just pack it down really tight. Then we're going to add more cabbage. Then we're going to tamp again. And just continue this process until you get your jar pretty much full. And as you do this, you will begin to see the liquid coming out of your cabbage. Don't be afraid that you're bruising the cabbage, because that's the whole point. You do want to bruise it to break that cell wall so that the liquid can come out. And as you continue to fill the jar and tamp it down, you will notice that there, whoops, forgot my whole funnel. You'll notice there seems to be more and more liquid. And that's a good thing, because in the end, we want the liquid to cover the cabbage. Now, as I'm doing this, I wanted to talk a little bit about how do you keep your sauerkraut after you make it. Now, there are people who will tell you to water bath can your sauerkraut. And to that, I say, why bother fermenting it? If you're going to water bath it, then just use a vinegar if all you want is sour cabbage, because that's all you're going to have if you water bath can it is sour cabbage. It is not going to be a probiotic. But if you ferment your cabbage properly, you can keep it in the refrigerator for months and months. I mean, I really don't know when you would be able to say that it has gone bad. It may get a little softer, but it is not going to go bad if it is fermented properly. So just keep it in the refrigerator or a cold room. Anything 60 or below, you should be good. I may not have enough to completely fill this jar. I don't think I will. We'll see. So this jar is not going to be full, it's only going to be half full. I actually might pour a little of that juice here in this other jar. Okay, so I'm just going to clean up a little bit and I'll be back and talk about the next step.
We are now ready to move to our next step, which is sealing up the jars. Now, what you want to keep in mind is oxygen is the enemy of your ferment. Mold needs oxygen to grow. So the less oxygen you have in your jar, the less chance you have of mold growing. And that's a common problem with fermenting. Now this jar, since it's only half full, has a much greater risk than this jar of growing mold because there's more room for air. But I have a solution for that. Now, these cabbage leaves that we saved, what I'm going to do with this one is I am going to, remember this is, we're going to take this cabbage leaf and we're going to put it on top and push it down so that all the bits of cabbage are under the liquid, and there may be parts of this that are not. So what I'm going to do is I am going to really salt this cabbage leaf, and of course salt's not going to stick to it, so I will put the salt on top after I put it in here. So you just kind of fold your leaf up and then push it down into the jar. Then I'm going to take salt and I am going to put salt on top of that leaf because salt will inhibit the growth of any mold or anything. And then I'm going to take this leaf here and I'm going to fold it. It's okay if it breaks up. We're just going to push it down on top. Then I'm going to take some salt. I'm going to salt the top of that leaf because I don't want any mold growing on my ferment. Now, you're going to want to put a lid on your jar. And I'm going to leave a link below in the video to these the Masontop kit, which will come with this tamper. You will get 4 of these pickle pipes, and you will get 4 of the glass pucks, and you will also get this little booklet, which is a treasure because it will tell you the ratios for your brine, and it has some wonderful recipes. I use this little book all of the time. Now, I don't always use the pickle pipes, but I do like them. So what you do is of course, you make sure your pickle pipe is clean and sanitized. And it's kind of made like a baby bottle nipple, so air can come out but not go in. And what you do is you place it on, and then you use the ring from your mason jar lid, and you just screw that on. And I usually try to, push out some of the air out of the jar. And this allows, when your ferment begins to ferment, it will bubble and create gases, and they need to escape. And this allows them to escape without oxygen getting in. Then the other way, so that's one way to top off your jar. And then the other way is just to use your canning lid and ring, which you have sanitized, and place it on and tighten down the lid just finger tight. Now with this method, once it starts to ferment, you are going to have to burp it. So pressure will build up under this lid, and so after a couple of days, you'll be able to know, because it won't pop up and down like this. It'll be really tight. Stuff will be pushing it out. Gases will be pushing pressure on it, and you just loosen the ring a little bit, and it'll burp, and then you tighten it back down. So that's another way to do it. But my favorite way, and I know everyone can't do this because you may not have the equipment, but if you have a food saver, I highly recommend getting the jar attachments. So it comes with 2 attachments. One is for a small mouth and one is for a large mouth jar. And you just put the attachment, you only put the lid on. Make sure everything is clean. There's no grains of salt or anything there to keep it from getting a good seal. Put the attachment on. And let me turn my thing on. And then you put this little hose goes to the machine. And under accessories, there's a button called marinate. And that's the one I use. Just push that button. This is a Weston. They make different brands, and it really doesn't matter which brand you have. Then you hit start, and it will suck the air out of the jar. Okay, and so then when it's done, take this out before you try to lift this. Then raise that up, and your lid is sealed on there, and all the air, and you'll see the liquid is all the way to the top. And then you're going to want to put your ring on. Go ahead and tighten that down. And so this will not have hardly any chance of growing mold or calm yeast because we have taken out all of the air. Now, once it starts to ferment, so after about a week, with the temperature in my house, after about a week, I will come and I will burp this jar if it is still sealed. Now, sometimes as it begins to ferment and the gases begin to flow, it will unseal, and that's okay. And in that case, I wouldn't even bother. I would just let it continue to do what it's doing. But if pressure is building up, then I will burp it. But and probably would reseal it if it was early on. But once the fermentation process sets in, you have a lesser chance of mold and calm yeast growing, but it's always present if there's oxygen in the jar. That's my favorite way, and that's definitely how I'm going to do this jar because there is so much headspace in this jar. Oh, you know what? I forgot to put my weight in this jar, so I'll open that up and put that back in. But of course, put your weight in your jar, and that just continues to hold everything down. So don't forget your weight. I will open this up and put the weight in that one. But if you don't have a weight, that cabbage leaf that we put in there will do the job. But it always helps to have a weight, if you have it, to use a weight if you have one. So there, that is sealed. I'm going to put my lid on. I'm going to open this one up and put my weight in the jar. I'm going to rinse this lid because I don't want any salt around the rim to keep it from sealing. So that one is sealed. Now, to talk about how long you have to wait. So typically in a house that is around 70 degrees or above, 70 to 75 degrees, it is going to take, I think, about 3 weeks to get this to the place that you want it. So you're going to want to set it in a place where it's not too warm, like not warmer than 75 degrees, but also not colder than 70, because below 70, you're not going to get much going on. It's going to take much longer. So just usually on your counter will work, but you're going to want to put it on in a bowl or on some kind of a dish with a lip on it, because when this begins to ferment, especially this one that is full, juices will overflow, and that's completely natural. And so you just want to, after about say 2.5 weeks, you can taste it and see if it's as sour as you want it. The less you open, especially if you use this method where you vacuum out the air, the less you open this jar, the better off you are, because you've taken away the possibilities of mold growing. Now, calm yeast is something that's very common with fermenting, and calm yeast is white. It kind of looks like an icing. It's not fuzzy at all. Mold is fuzzy. Mold is, and you don't want mold. If you see mold, you want to take it off as soon as possible. I usually don't eat anything that has had mold on it, because mold has these tentacles that go down into the vegetable, and it's just not safe. The body cannot fight off mold So I don't want any mold in my ferments. But calm yeast is harmless. It's white. It looks like an icing. It's not fuzzy. And you can just dip it off, scrape it off, dip it off. Like you may have to take off that cabbage leaf if it gets covered in the calm yeast, and it's fine to eat. It will not hurt you. So you just want to keep an eye out for any mold growing. But in probably in 2 weeks, you could have kraut if your house is warm enough, and definitely in 3 weeks. So after that point, you can begin to eat it and enjoy it, and you can keep it in your refrigerator or in a cool place. Like if you have a cold room that is like 50 degrees or below, you can keep it there, or you can keep it in your refrigerator for months and months. And like I showed you, I have some ferment that I have had for over a year that is still perfectly fine and delicious. But as long as you don't have any mold on your ferment, it is safe to eat. So just make it and enjoy it. It is so good for your gut, and it is just, it makes a happy gut, and a happy gut makes a happy you, because it really does help your immunity, and it just helps how you feel overall. So, and how do you eat it? You might say, okay, so I've made my kraut. Now, how do I serve it? How do I eat it? Fermented sauerkraut you want to serve like a pickle. Take a little out of the jar and put it on your plate like you would pickles, and you eat it cold. That's how you get all the benefits from the probiotics that are in the sauerkrauts. And I have a clip of some giardiniera that I was making where you can see the bubbling. Hopefully I'll be able to find that and put that here in the video so you can see that. It's just awesome. So just keep this on your countertop and put a dish under it to catch any overflow when it starts to ferment. Makes for a good conversation piece if you have guests and they want to know what that science project is on your countertop. Then you can tell them you're making a probiotic. And 1 tablespoon of homemade sauerkraut has 10 trillion probiotics in it. And that is equivalent to like 16 bottles of probiotics that you can buy in the store. Dr. Mercola had some that he made, sent away and tested, and that was the results that came back. That's where I got that information. So just 1 tablespoon of sauerkraut a day is going to give you 10 trillion probiotics, and that has got to be good for your gut. So I hope you'll try fermenting sauerkraut. Thanks for coming and joining me as I made this sauerkraut. Please, if you like my videos, be sure and hit the like button, hit the subscribe button and the little bell, and share this video with your friends. I have lots of more videos that I want to make on fermentation, and hopefully they will be coming out soon. So I look forward to seeing you then, and I appreciate you so much. God bless. Bye-bye.